Hey everybody, Rob here at eTrailer.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster Hy-Power diode wiring kit on our 2012 Fiat 500. Now our diodes are going to allow us to transfer the signal from our motorhome's lights to the lights that are already on our Fiat, so when we're flat towing it, everybody knows what's going on. Whether we're driving down the highway, we need to change lanes, or if we're just driving at night, everyone's going to know that a vehicle is being towed behind it, and that way, when we do go to change lanes, there's no miscommunication between everybody on the road and ourselves. Now, my favorite part about the diodes is the fact that it's a one-time installation. There's nothing that we need to do afterwards to set anything up. We can simply just plug in the electrical cord, but we're not going to have to worry about setting up magnetic lights like the old style we've seen before, where you put some magnets on there, then you have to run a wire up to the front of your Fiat to the back of the motorhome. But then we got that wire dangling on the side, potentially scratching the paint. Not to mention, once we get where we're going, we have to take them down, find somewhere to store them, and then we can drive. With these, our lights are going to act completely normal when we're driving our vehicle, and the motorhome is going to send all the signals to these lights whenever we're flat towing it. So again, no extra setup, no extra steps needed. The other nice thing about the diodes is the fact that it's going to protect our Fiat's electrical system. If there was any kind of problem on the motorhome end, the diodes are going to make sure that it doesn't backfeed into the electrical system, cause any problems later on. So we're going to make sure that our Fiat's electrical system is in working order, and again, it's not going to affect it when we're driving around normally. Now your diode kit is going to come with almost everything you need to get it installed. It's going to come with plenty of wire to run it from the front all the way to the back of our Fiat, the 4 diodes and all the connectors. It's even going to come with an umbilical so we can plug the front of our Fiat into the back of our motorhome. However, we ended up actually switching out from a 4-pole connector to a 6-pole connector. That way, if later on we wanted to add a charge line to keep the battery charged or any other kind of component, we can easily wire it in because there's 2 extra signals and terminals inside there that aren't being used. Now, I know a lot of customers may be a little bit nervous when it comes to electrical work, but really it's very simple, pretty straightforward. We're just going to take our 4-pole wire, find out where we're mounting it on the front of our Fiat, and then run a wire to the back so we can access the wires back here and tap into the factory wiring for our taillights. That may seem a little bit intimidating, the fact that we have to splice into our factory lights, but we'll walk you through how to test for each signal and which wire to use so you can have the confidence to do it at home. In fact, let's go ahead and bring the shop and wire it up together. To start out, I do want to mention that we have our fascia removed because we just got done installing our base plate, and that's a really good time to do all the other components of your install because we don't have to fight the fascia and try to route things behind it with it in the way. So to get your diodes in place, the first thing you want to do is figure out where you're going to be mounting your wiring on the front. Now we already have these prongs that are built into our base plate, so we're using those, and that's going to be where we're eventually going to mount our wiring at. And I just want to make sure you leave enough slack here that you have enough wire to work with. But we started routing it towards the back of our Fiat, so we just came over to the side of our base plate, came up, and came into the engine bay right here. And once we got it in the engine bay, we went around our battery, going back towards the firewall, and we dropped it straight down so we could get access underneath. Our wire came down right here. We went ahead and zip tied it to these existing lines to keep it away from the exhaust. Went around this mount. Then we actually used this cover to our advantage. We put the wire underneath the edge of the cover, again to help protect it against the exhaust. We ran it back until it came out at the end of the cover right here. Now, there's a lot of components back here that are either moving or some heat sources as well. So instead of staying on the driver's side, I actually followed the fuel tank over. You can see the wire right here. We went around the edge of the fuel tank using zip ties to keep everything nice and secure. Went over the rear axle, continuing to follow all these factory lines to help keep it in place. And then we have the rest of our wire right here. Now we need to get up to the top of the vehicle so we can get access to our taillights and the wiring. So we'll just leave our wire here for now and we'll move up top. Now if we open up our rear hatch, right on the inside channel there, we're going to have 2 bolts that are holding each one of our taillights in. So we grab a 10mm socket, pull both of those out. Now once you have both of those removed, you want to grab your taillight. Now you may be tempted to just grab the edge and start peeling to the outside. You don't want to pull too far to the side because there's some alignment pins. We don't want those to break, so we want to go back as straight back as we can. You can see those little pins there. They're really easy to break if you start pulling too much to the side. And if we flip our taillight over, we'll find the connector. It's got a little tab on there. Should be able to squeeze that tab or lift up on that piece and disconnect it. Maybe easier if you get a small screwdriver, that way we can get access underneath there and slide the connector out. Now we're going to set the taillight assembly aside where it won't get damaged. Now we're over here on the driver's side. We went to go pull our taillights out, and we need to test each one of the wires on the plug to figure out what circuits they control. Now I went ahead and turned on my headlights so that my taillight functions will come on. We did find that our taillights are only sending that signal back when there's a bulb. So when we unplugged our taillights, it wasn't sending enough signal for us to test. So we're going to leave our taillights plugged in, and we're going to test each one of these wires to see which one is our taillight wire. So we'll start with the yellow wire with the red stripe. We are getting a signal there, but I'm going to go through and double check that none of the other ones are getting a signal. So on the driver's side, our taillight wire is going to be the yellow wire with the red stripe. Now we're going to do the same kind of testing over on the passenger side, so you may have to plug your taillights assembly back in. But once we verify the color wire over there, we're going to turn our taillights off and have an assistance step on the brake pedal. Over on the passenger side, our taillight wire is going to be the black wire with the yellow stripe. So we either need to write that down or remember that this is going to be our taillight function. So I went ahead and turned my taillights off. And now we have an assistant stepping on the brake pedal to activate the brake lights, but we want to isolate each signal. So again, you want to make sure your taillights are turned off and nothing else is going, like the turn signals. And we're getting the signal off of the green wire that's going to be right next to our taillight wire on the driver's side. So we'll go ahead and repeat that testing over on the passenger side. And over on the passenger side, our brake signal is going to be the green wire with the yellow stripe. It's in the same location that's going to be next to our taillight wire on the passenger side. So these 2 wires are the 2 wires that we want to work with. But now that we've identified them, we can go ahead and remove the taillight assemblies, turn all the functions off on our vehicle. Now we need to get our wiring up to the top of our vehicle so that we can get all those functions to our taillights. But before we do, I do want to mention that we already went ahead and cut off the 4-pole end when we were routing it, because this end is actually going to get tied into our taillight wiring. So we want to separate each one of these wires, and it should be separated part of the way, starting just because the plug had a little bit on there, but we want to go ahead and just pull the rest of them apart as high up to the last anchor point as we can, so we have 4 individual wires to work with. And the easiest way I've found to get the wires from underneath to this pocket up here where our taillight goes is to use some kind of pull wire. I'm going to be using an airline tube that I had laying around. You can use whatever you have available, even if it is just a coat hanger or a string with something heavy attached to it. We want to feed it down in between the body and the bumper here until we can get access underneath. We can attach our green wire and our brown wire over here on the passenger side and bring them up using this as a hook. So we can find the end of our green wire and our brown wire, and I'm going to attach it to my pull wire here just using some electrical tape. And we can grab the other end of our pull wire, start pulling all that slack up to the top. Make sure we grab all the slack, and it's not a bad idea to go underneath and double check, make sure there's not a wad of wire that didn't get tangled up. And then I always like to zip tie the wire to the factory wiring. That way if there is a little bit of slack here, it won't fall back down and cause a problem later on. So we can get ready to start making our connections. Now I'm going to start with the brake wire on the passenger side. There's going to be that green wire with the yellow stripe. We're going to move downstream just a bit from the connector. I'm going to cut that wire in half, and we'll strip back both ends of it. Now we want to grab one of the diodes out of our kit that has all blue connectors on it. We can take two of them, doesn't matter which two. We're going to crimp each one of these onto the end of the wires we just stripped. And if we look at our diode, we're going to have two terminals on the inside and one going to the outside. The one going to the outside is going to be the one closest to the plug, so we can plug that in. And the one on the inside is going to be the other one that we just connected. Now that leaves us one more in terminal, so we can pull that spade terminal off. And since this is the brake wire, we're going to grab the green wire that we ran back here. I like to give myself a little bit of slack just for getting the taillight out and everything else, so we don't have to worry about pulling on it. So just give myself a little bit of extra room, estimate about how much we need. We can cut the wire, and we'll strip back the end of it and crimp that spade terminal in place. And we'll just plug it into the other end of the diode. So once you have your right hand brake and turn signal hooked up, you should have your green wire coming from the front going into one diode along with the factory wire going in, and then it's going to go out directly to the connector. Now our taillight wire is going to be just a little bit different. We're going to start with the taillight wire, still going to cut it in half and strip back both ends. The only thing that is going to be a little bit different is we want to grab the diode that has the yellow terminal on it, but we're going to put the blue ones on the factory wires first. And again, the one closest to the plug will go in the out terminal, and the one furthest from the plug will go to the in terminal. Now this time we'll take our taillight wire, give ourselves a little bit of extra, cut the wire, except this time we do want to hold on to the excess wire, strip this back and the end that we just cut off. I will say, if you haven't noticed, the plastic coating on these wires is a little bit difficult to strip back. Just end up kind of tearing it a little bit, but I want to strip back both ends of the wire. Once we have both ends stripped back, we're going to combine the two wires together. We'll take our yellow spade terminal and crimp it over both of them. That's the whole reason why they give you this yellow spade terminal. It's because it's a lot easier to get both wires inside this larger terminal rather than trying to cram them into the blue one. I'll take the terminal. That's going to plug into the taillight diode on the other in terminal. Now we need to take our brown wire, the length of excess that we have, we're going to send this back down to the body so we can meet up with our yellow wire, and that's going to go over to the driver's side, and the diodes are going to hook up exactly the same. The brown to the taillight, and the yellow is going to go to the brake signal on the driver's side. And we shouldn't have to use a pull wire. We should be able to just drop the wire down and have plenty of room for it to get down there. You do just kind of want to be mindful of the slack, so I might actually take a zip tie and tie it here as well. That way it's not pulling on the diode whenever I start routing my wire over. So now that we're done with our connections on the passenger side, I'm going to go ahead and plug my taillight back in and just kind of dry fit everything into there, because the diodes are going to take up a little bit of extra space, and we need to make sure that we actually have room and we're not going to have to move them or make any kind of adjustments. So if we can get it in place, we'll go ahead and put the screws back in, but again, kind of have to move everything around to see how it's going to fit. And once you do get them in, you put the 2 bolts back that are holding the taillight in place. So here we made our connections over on the driver's side. And it's going to be exactly the same, except that brown wire is just going to go straight into the diode by itself, since we were jumping off the passenger side. So you have our brown wire coming into a diode along with the factory taillight wire going out to the taillight connector. Same thing with our yellow wire. We have our factory brake signal coming in along with the yellow wire and then going out to the taillight connector. So we'll do the same thing, dry fit our taillight, put everything back in place, then we can go underneath and I'll show you how we got our wire over here and the path we took to get it up to the top. So our yellow wire, we actually ran towards the back, and when our brown wire came down, I ran it over the top of our bumper beam here in the back, along with the yellow wire. It's actually pretty high behind the bumper here to help stay protected. Went over all these supports over to the passenger side, and then we use that same pull wire method to get our wires up top. Now, I just suggest that you do go over the bumper beam on the frame here to keep the wires away from the exhaust and anything else that may potentially damage it. So we do have one more wire left, and that's going to be that white wire. Now, this is my last anchor point, so I'm going to go ahead and trim my white wire off, because this is actually our ground wire, and the bottom of the frame is actually a really good spot to put it. It won't be interfering with anything, or we can put it into the side of the frame, either way. So we'll go ahead and trim the excess wire off. We'll strip back the end of it. I want to grab the small ring terminal out of our kit, slide it over the end of our wire, and crimp it in place. Then we can grab the self-tapping screw and a 5/16 nut driver, and I'm going to go right into the side of the frame. I'm going to get it started first, and then we'll pull the screw out, put the ring terminal over it. And the big thing with this is you want to make sure that ring terminal is nice and snug, but it's not going to move around, but you also don't want to strip out the self-tapping screw. Now would be a good time to go ahead and clean up any wires, make sure they're all protected, and put any panels back if you took them down, and then we can go ahead and start testing all of our circuits. So I went ahead and took the extension cable and I plugged it into my tester here in the front of our wiring. That way I can isolate the problem if there is one, and I don't have to worry about the motor home. Plus, we don't have our fascia back in place yet, so it's just easier to use a tester. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my tester on, and we can verify that all the lights are working properly. So here we can see that the taillight function is working, as well as my left turn signal, my brake lights, and my right turn signal. Now that we know that all of our circuits are working properly, we can continue with our flat toe installation and get the fascia back in place. I'm going to loosely take the fascia. Now it's not going to completely fit back because of the components we have down here, but I'm going to get it lined up and again use one screw up top so it won't fall down. Just to loosely get it in place, and then we can actually use our base plate and all your other components to trim out so the fascia can go back into place. So here we have our breakaway switch, which really is causing the most issue because it sticks out the farthest. So I'm just going to take a pair of cutters and I'm going to cut the honeycomb of the grill here till we have an opening and we can push the fascia past the breakaway switch. And once we have that piece cut out, we can get the fascia pushed in and make any additional trimming we need to for the arms to go in place and make sure that our wiring and any other components will fit through. Because you can see that the arms actually aren't going to, the base plate's not going to interfere without the arms in place, so we can actually get the base plate in before we cut those. That way we can minimize the amount of cutting we have to do. We only need to cut enough so that we can get the arm in and it doesn't interfere. So I'm just going to go through and trim off any bit of the grill that's interfering with anything. And again, right now the main thing that's really interfering is this breakaway switch here. Now that the fascia is trimmed and we can get it all the way on, we can replace all the fasteners that we took out earlier. And don't forget to plug the lights back in behind the liner here before you put the liner back in place. And then we can kind of pull the fender out a little bit, get the liner lined up, and we can put the screws back in place. So we're going to get ready to wire up our plug. So we already have our wiring ran, and I made sure to leave myself plenty of excess wire up front here. So we need to go ahead and cut the end of the 4-pole off. We don't actually need all this wire, so I'm actually going to cut it just a few inches past the actual mounting point. You do want to make sure you have 4 individual wires. You can kind of split them apart if you need to. And then we'll strip back the end of each one of the wires. So now we can take our plug. We're going to pull the boot off the back of it. We'll take all of our wires, feed it in through the small end. And for now, we just want to push it out of the way so we have room to work with our wires. Now if we look at the back of the terminals on the plug itself, they are going to be labeled. We can go through and tell you which ones we're going to be using. If we start at the top and go counterclockwise, the top one is going to be labeled TM for trailer marker, so that's going to be our brown wire. If we move over, the next one is going to be labeled GD, it's the large one, for ground, that'll be the white wire. Then LT for left turn, that'll be our yellow wire. RT for right turn, that'll be our green wire. And then finally, the pin over here is going to be labeled S, that's going to be your electric brake signal, and the center pin is going to be your auxiliary power if you have a charge line. Now each one of the terminals is going to have a little set screw in there, so you want to get a really small Phillips screwdriver. I'm just going to loosen the terminal up. I suggest to not take out that screw all the way because they're very small, very easy to drop. But we'll loosen it up. We can grab the corresponding wire. I like to make sure that all the strands are together so we don't have to worry about them poking out. Put our wire into the terminal. And I like to leave just a tiny bit of copper at the very top. That way I know that it's going to get a good connection. We don't have to worry about the insulation interfering and give us an intermittent connection issue. We just want to tighten it up. Give it a quick tug, make sure it's secure. We're just going to go through connecting all the corresponding wires to the correct terminals the same way. Once you get them all connected, you can take our dust cover, slide it back over the plug, And I usually come back and I'll backfill the back end of it with either silicone, dielectric grease, some kind of sealer, so that our terminals are going to be protected inside. And then I try to tape as far up on the wire as I can and along the boot, not only to keep it in place, but also to kind of hide some of this color on the front of our Fiat. Then we can line up our socket with the bracket on our base plate. I'm going to use the self-tapping screws that came with our base plate to secure everything down. But again, I'm Rob here at eTrailer.com, and that'll finish up your look at the Roadmaster Hy-Power diode wiring kit on our 2012 Fiat 500.